Taoiseach Simon Harris says he's seeking more information about reports that Israeli-operated aircraft carried weapons from the United States to Israel but travelled through Irish airspace. He says his understanding is that no consent was sought from the government. Joining me now, Scott Lucas, Professor and Political Analyst at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin. Scott, good morning.
Very good morning to you, Pat.
Now, we want to talk about the situation in Gaza, but first of all, that business of aircraft overflying and coming through Irish airspace bearing weapons, there's probably no way we can find out if they don't ask for permission.
Well, there's no way to find out except when you get a website that is able to get records from other sources, for example, from the Belgian airport through which these aircraft passed. And that's what the ditch did. Just about a week ago, the ditch carried the first report of one of these aircraft moving from the United States, flying over Ireland, stopping over in Belgium, and then on their way to Israel. They were carrying items like sniper ammunition and detonators, explosive detonators, which are used in missiles. And that, of course, would mean missiles that are being used on Gaza on a daily basis. The ditch then found records for at least two more flights. So there's three so far that have come out. And of course, as you mentioned, those are only the ones that we know about. There may be many more in which we haven't been able to track down the records. These flights are coming from multiple locations in the States, according to the ditch. From Travis Air Force Base in California, from Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, and apparently from an airport in the New York City area. So I think we've got the tip of an iceberg and therefore the tip of what may be a very, very troublesome story for the government. I suspect there's some very intensive discussions going on, probably with the Americans today, about how far this extends, how many flights are crossing, and if it is true what the Irish line is, why the Irish government was not approached to give formal consent for these flights.
Presumably because it would not be forthcoming given the attitude of the Irish government to the whole Gaza situation, recognising Palestine and therefore being at odds with current US policy.
Well, that may be the case, that the Americans may have thought that they'd get a no, but the point is that under the Air Navigation Act of 1946, and as part of Irish neutrality, no country, not even the U.S., can fly weapons through Irish airspace without getting that consent. So it means that maybe the Americans expected a no, but they've now placed the problem on the Taoiseach, on the government, which is you either then have to say, oh, okay, America, it's fair enough. You can keep on delivering these weapons, including some used in offensive weapons, as we have this open-ended war, including on civilians in Gaza, or the Irish government has got to take a stand against an ally, the United States, and say, no, sorry, you're going to have to route the aircraft around Irish airspace, or you're going to have to give us a good reason to give you an exemption.
Now, I remember years and years ago, there was a concern about Aeroflot and Russian originated flights landing in Shannon Airport bearing whatever. And I think that was dealt with eventually. How effectively, I don't know. But those flights that may have been carrying troops, for example, ceased.
Yeah, and then also just as a bit of the wider context, you may remember going back over 20 years ago, that the Americans, as part of the so-called War on Terror, were moving people around the world to black sites, in some cases where they could be tortured. And some of those flights carrying out what is euphemistically called extraordinary rendition, some of those flights also were either in Irish airspace or may indeed have landed at Shannon as well. So, we've got a history of this. I think the upshot of this is, Pat, is that if the Israeli attacks on Gaza ended very, very soon, that would relieve the pressure on the Irish government. This would be dealt with behind closed doors. The Americans would say, well, we kind of had to do this. We are supporters of Israel. And the Irish government can sort of wave it off. If this is an ongoing story in terms of these attacks in Gaza, and of course we're now in the 11th month, then I think the Irish government faces a problem, especially with public opinion in this country, with many, many people having increasing concerns about that death toll, especially amongst civilians.
Now, the observers would say, listen, all they have to do is change the flight path. Instead of taking the North Atlantic route, go slightly further south, avoiding Irish airspace, coming in through UK airspace and French airspace, who are friendly towards American efforts.
Well, fair enough. Well, not fair enough in terms of the wider sense that I don't like the fact that these weapons are being used to kill civilians. But, if the British and the French, according to their national laws, want to grant permission, or if it's an open-ended arrangement where the Americans can cross, okay. The point here is this is Irish national law. This is not a protocol. This is not like a friendly arrangement where the Irish government should be consulted. This is a matter that if the Americans are overflying Irish airspace, they are breaking national law. And indeed, any violator of Irish airspace, in principle, could face a prison term. So, I think that's where you start with, that in terms of as a domestic issue, Irish sovereignty and the Irish legal system is, let's be honest with, being pushed aside by the Americans.
Now, is it only the Americans? Because if you have Israeli-originated flights that go over empty aircraft, pick up the stuff and bring it back through Irish airspace, I mean, the Israelis would simply give us two fingers.
Well, that's exactly what is happening, by the way. I should have made that clear in the story, that you do have these Israeli cargo planes that are going across to America collecting, weapons and ammunition and then coming back across. And we know the Israelis are not going to seek Irish permission because they know they would get a no. We know that the Irish government is opposed to the ongoing Israeli, let's call them what they are, mass killings in Gaza. But again, there's a bit of a difference here. The fact is that Ireland does not have this close partnership with Israel. It does not have, as it were, an alliance with Israel. It has a much closer relationship with the Americans. So whether or not the Americans are flying the material on their own planes or allowing the Israeli planes to come to America, collect it, and go back across, you sort of have a channel, an existing Irish-U.S. channel, which should be used to resolve this issue when such a channel probably doesn't exist with Israel.